As we get ready for week 11 of the fantasy football season, here's a reminder. Just because waivers have run doesn't mean the work is done. You can always get ahead of the competition by making those smart pickups and those stashes that could pay off later. And with the fantasy playoffs just around the corner, let's look at some high-end running back handcuffs. Now this first player is getting a little bit of buzz, not just because he had a decent game last week, but also because, well, the guy ahead of him has been kind of a major bust in fantasy. Rico Dowdle is the number 2 running back for the Dallas Cowboys. Tony Pollard, of course, is the number 1 guy, and Tony Pollard has just been a huge letdown. Almost everybody expected him to break out this season with Zeke gone, but it hasn't happened despite having more opportunities. It just, for some reason, has resulted in worse production. Pollard is only averaging 3.9 yards per carry on the season. That's bad enough, but again, just from the fantasy angle, on that Cowboys offense, being the guy and really not even sharing time early on, he is 6th right now among all running backs in expected fantasy points per game. He should be a true RB1. But instead, right now, he's 23rd in actual fantasy points per game. And as everybody who is rostered Tony Pollard knows, he's not scoring touchdowns and he's not breaking out with big games, even in blowouts, even against inferior opponents. Even against the Giants last week, he couldn't put together a big game. On the other hand, Rico Dowdle actually came away with 79 yards and a touchdown. Now, before we get too far, we do have to remind ourselves it was the Giants, and Dowdle's touches, most of them, came in the second half. This was garbage time. It was a blowout, and so we can't put too much stock into this. But looking at the larger body of work, here's what Dowdle has done. He, unlike Pollard, who has been subpar as a rusher, Dowdle is averaging 4.5 yards per carry. And he's been involved pretty much all season as a pass catcher. He's got 29 receptions on the year. That places him in the top 10 among all running backs. So reasons to roster Dowdle right now. First of all, the obvious. He's the backup to a starting, what has been a workhorse and maybe won't be down the stretch, but for the most part, a high-end running back in Dallas. He's on a good offense. He's performing pretty well when he's on the field. If he's effective near the goal line, he might even supplant Pollard in that role, although the Cowboys tend to just pass when they get in the red zone. Still holding out some hope for a big Pollard game in Week 11 because it's the Carolina Panthers, but what if it doesn't happen, and what if Dowdle does have a big game? All told, if you're a Pollard owner, you should definitely have Dowdle waiting in the wings, and even if you're not, it wouldn't hurt to stash him. Now, one NFL team actually had a shakeup in the running back room unexpectedly, for actually reasons that nobody really knows why now. The Jets, after their disappointing loss, released Michael Carter. Still remember where at one point after drafting Breece Hall, everyone was like, oh man, terrible situation for him. He's not going to get on the field with Michael Carter there. Well, needless to say, Breece Hall has taken over as the RB1. They signed Dalvin Cook, which they probably regret. But then Carter had just not touched the ball very much. And when he did, it really wasn't that good anyways. So he is out, which now clears possibly a path for Israel Abanikanda. Now, trusting anybody in this Jets offense is tough. Even Breece has had his moments, but he's also had his struggles, which is part of the reason why I want to look now at Abanikanda. For the good things that Breece has done, he's also 12th highest in stuff rate. It's a little complicated to explain what stuff rate is exactly, but anyways, it's not good. That means he's up there with some of the more sluggish running backs in the league. I think we have already established that Dalvin Cook is pretty much toast at this point. He's only still on the roster because they paid him so much. So could we see Izzy carve out a little bit of a part-time role? Possibility of injury looms for either of those running backs who've had their share of injuries. I mean, there's definitely a path here. Now again, you don't necessarily want to invest in this offense, but I will say with a guy like Abanikanda, here's what's intriguing. He's got that Breece Hall-like home run ability. And I'm not saying he is Breece, but you got to look at the resume. In Pittsburgh, his last year in college, he scored 21 touchdowns and ran for 1,431 yards. In terms of just pure athleticism, he has a burst score in the 97th percentile, and in fact, Player Profiler, which is a great job tracking all of these metrics and ranking them, actually had him number 1 in this year's running back class in terms of overall athleticism. Izzy is a guy that both Chris and I were drafting a lot during the preseason, especially early on. It was actually really unfortunate that he landed with the Jets, who had Breece Hall, and this was before they even signed Cook because it just wasn't the best spot. Was really hoping he'd go somewhere that had a path to more touches. But maybe that path is open now. Again, don't expect a lot off the bat, but we're looking down the road, a guy with upside, a guy who could make some big plays. He still intrigues me. Better off in a dynasty league or a deep league, but hey, you never know what's going to happen down the stretch. All right, now I got one more RB handcuff that I want to recommend. You're going to have to bear with me here. I'm going to talk about a 31-year-old running back who has 12 carries this year for a total of 23 yards. And yet this is the perfect time to pick him up because he's on one of the best offenses in the league. He's been around. He helped a lot of teams actually win fantasy championships just a year ago. If you figured out I was talking about Jerick McKinnon, then you're spot on. We all remember last year, out of nowhere, he came on, and from week 13 till the end of the year, he scored 8 touchdowns. I mean, literally every week he was scoring a touchdown and sometimes multiple touchdowns, and he was getting chunks of yardage too. There's no guarantee that happens this year, but if you look at the running back room there, it's exactly the same. And their passing offense in the wide receiver room is actually worse. They've barely used him this year, but maybe it's because they're saving him for the end of the year in the playoffs. Look, again, no guarantees, but how many running backs out there on the waiver wire are worth stashing where you could break out and say, well, he's got a chance to score a touchdown this week? I think McKinnon pretty much tops everybody out there in terms of that, and he catches passes. In fact, he probably gets more receptions than rush attempts these days. And in a PPR league, that's valuable, gets you at least somewhat of a floor. My only question is this out of nowhere jet usage from last year a result of Eric Bieniemy and what he does in terms of play calling? Because you see the way he's operating in Washington, he's going for the unpredictability angle where he just breaks out different guys each week and tries to keep the defense off balance. He's doing it and it's working. You know, the Chiefs this year have been a lot more predictable. So again, I'm not expecting McKinnon to all of a sudden surge, but if I'm looking for a high upside running back stash who I could break out in an emergency, McKinnon's probably number one. Now, even though I just said that the Jets are not an offense you should be too excited about, I'm going to mention another Jet here, Xavier Gipson, a guy who's undrafted free agent out of Stephen F. Austin. Looks like he actually might be the wide receiver 2 there. This is a very, very gradual progression. Again, his targets the last 3 weeks have gone from 1 to 2 to 3. So his week 10 output of 3 targets does represent his season and career high. But again, this is a guy working into the rotation, and this is also a result of the fact that they have nobody else who's worth throwing to. Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb, well, I mean, they're only there because of Aaron Rodgers in the first place, but they are working themselves out because they've just been bad. Lazard just cannot get separation. He's got a catch rate of 50% right now. We've seen him also have some bad drops. And for Randall Cobb, it got to the point where he's basically a healthy scratch these days. Cobb is number 1, and Lazard also top 5 in drop rate on the season. And you know they traded McCole Hardman, Corey Davis before the season just up and retired. Gipson is pretty much the number 2 guy there, and he's going to keep increasing in value. He's not a big receiver, but he's got good speed, ran a 4.47. He's a player who won the Kearney Award as the best athlete in the Western Athletic Conference. Definitely not a household name, but again, that's the name of the game here. We're looking for guys way under the radar. I don't see Zach Wilson losing his job, and in fact, Robert Saleh, for some reason, gave him a vote of confidence, pretty much because that's the only option they have at this point. I'm not counting on an Aaron Rodgers return. This has nothing to do with that, whether he plays in the regular season or not. This is all about a guy who's getting in the rotation, earning opportunities, making the most of it. And look, this team is probably still going to have to pass enough to maybe make him valuable at some point. Better served as a dynasty stash, but if you're in a deep enough league or you're just looking for someone with upside, I'll look at Gipson. And then this might be the first time that I repeat a player from Beat the Breakout, because once I kind of hip you to them, I don't necessarily feel the need to repeat them, but I want to go back to Dontavian Wicks of Green Bay. Wicks drew some compliments from the coaching staff this past week, and you can see why. In terms of getting separation, he's actually one of the better receivers in the league, and he's a rookie. And not a high-end draft pick either. He's a 5th round pick, late 5th round pick out of Virginia. Look, I really like Jaden Reed, the other rookie there, and he's been coming on lately. Definitely somebody worth picking up. Wicks has gone completely under the radar because not as big a name. They have several other young receivers there who get more attention and have gotten more targets. But if you notice, over the last 3 games, Wicks has steadily been involved. He's got 4 targets for those 3 in a row. And part of this does also have to do with the guy who should be smashing, should be starting every week on fantasy teams, but he's not, and that's Christian Watson. I mean, what a massive letdown he has been. Only 42% catch rate. I mean, we want to blame Jordan Love here because he's had his moments where he's looked really bad. But if you look at the fact that there are other players on this team producing, passer rating for Jordan Love when targeting Watson is by far the lowest on the team. Reed is number one here, but Wicks, as far as wide receivers, is second. It says more about Watson than anything. Watson, a big part of the struggles here for the Packers. He's not getting it done in the end zone, but they keep targeting him. 9 end zone targets, and he's converted once. This is why you see so many Romeo Doubs touchdowns, because they know he can actually convert here, and Watson just is not. How long before we see Wicks get involved down near the goal line? The route running continues to increase for Wicks, and so he's gonna, at some point, have redraft value if Watson is out with another one of his injuries, or they just decide, look, it's time to feature Wicks more. I could see him having some flex appeal. And then finally, I'm not going to do a full breakdown here because in the vast majority of redraft leagues, Dorian Thompson-Robinson is just not viable. I realize Deshaun Watson is gone for the season. PJ Walker apparently is out as the backup starter. They're going to give a shot to the rookie and see what happens. I can't say I feel too confident about his chances this coming week going against the Steelers defense. Didn't look good at all in his first start. But in 2 quarterback leagues, super flex leagues, you need to have a second passer there. And with so many injuries, so many other just bad options at quarterback this year, he might be worth running out there if he shows something this week. So again, I really have to wait and see it. I would not recommend stashing him right now. Maybe in a deep dynasty league, sure. But right now in redraft, even 2 QB, I'm going to put him on the watch list. I'm going to say if you have room, maybe if you had Watson, you can swap him out. Not expecting great things, but you never know. Those are the best stashes. Heading into week 11, don't forget waiver wire, trade, start sit. Everything you need to help you win this week is right here in this playlist.